I wanted to excuse for having a very poor body and to ask your permission to sit while I talk and comfortably read here. But as you see, the life is full of surprises. I had wanted to say two things. Wanted one. The little sample of personality meanings which you will see here is just the 1 promille of the top of the iceberg. So there is more to it, of course. And Richard Bell said the other day that you can have the two ways of presenting. One is that your speech is a backup to your slides, and that your slides are backup to your speech. I don't know, but I actually left deliberately all the text there because I thought that in case of having a very strong Serbian pronunciation, you need to look at it yourself. So the main text would be here, and I will just like to tell you a couple of words. Of course, we all know constructive alternativism. One of the rare examples that psychologists has actually defined a philosophical position in his theory. And Kelly was doing this with his theory, which was mainly presented in the books like a theory of personality. It was also applied to clinical psychology, but the main subject of this research is actually a human being puzzle from many researchers which are constituted in human sciences. And the historical period in which Kelly has found himself working was replete with different constructions competing to show what human being really was. You had so many theories: humanist, behaviorist, psychoanalyst. Everybody who had a high self-esteem wanted to have his own theory of personality, which made my job very difficult because look at the physicians. They have only one theory of gravity, and look at poor me. I'm teaching the personality. So probably the most important term in researching a human being was personality. With kindred notions of person, self-identity, character, disposition, role type. All those terms cannot be separated semantically. They cannot be separated from personality. They go in the same package and they are interwoven with it. But what about searching for the personality in history, in a long-term history, not the American? Where is my book? Not in American history. We started 200 years ago, but really to go 2,500 years. So actually, we didn't have personality 2,500 years ago. There was no word for it, and there was no object to point to and say, aha, this is a personality. It first originated with Greek poet Sappho, and it has a fascinating difference in meanings since then. So at the beginning, we have lived without the personality because we were the puppets of gods. So whatever we do, it was some sort of a higher business above in heaven because Zeus wanted to have a good screw with Europa, or Athena wanted to put you in the battle in me, and blah, 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 blah. So the reasons of differing conduct were always assigned to God's will. First rooted meanings of personality were related to the mask that was symbolizing a human face. Now there are different ideas. What was the first one? What was it? An Etrurian word "fersu," designating the burying mask for the face of a dead man. Was it a prosopon, a Greek word for the face and the mask in the ancient Latin, or was it persona, or was it perseuna, another Latin word for it? But basically, it was connected with the mask, which signifies certain features, but also the social rights, the obligation and rights, like a legal phase. So you still have this distinction between personal phase and a legal phase in the law. Personality conceived as a mask directed other people to certain kinds of typified social expectations, separate from the being that was being symbolized by the mask. It was representing an indicator of personality, but at the same time was a manual that our mask, that our personality is not the same as our inner essence, what we really truly are. And ontological content of personality has appeared when the face was identified with that which lay under. Hypostasis in Greek, and the one you probably know better, subjectum, subjectum, a subject. Something which is put under, something which is making liquidity, substance of what you are talking about. So only founded in Christian metaphysics in the work of holy fathers in 4th century Anno Domini in Cappadocia, personality received its full ontological content and the connection with the inner human being. So personality was actually something which is indicating that there is something lying under. In the centuries that followed, the human thought was based on the idea of the subject as a rational, a self-contained being whose existence was founded in its mental potential, the being that was free, agentic, separate from other beings, responsible to God, and concepts through which this inner essence was worded, like personality, person, identity, and self, represented the notions with myriad definitions, for which every lay person intuitively knew what they actually meant, but could not provide. So, yes, this is one of those notions which we understand, which we know, but when you have to define it, So personality thus became, in the thinking of anthropologists, something similar to time and space, a category of the human mind. It was the peak of work of a very famous anthropologist, Marcel Mauss. In philosophy, it was seen in diverse philosophical approaches from the past, and it was usually presented as an emanation of the human soul. Personality has to do something with the soul. You cannot divide it. It was divided from the soul only the behaviorists and James and the first scientific steps. So, in history, personality was superior to the lesser souls of plants and animals, inherently active and agentic, like some active monad. It was private and contained in psychological interiority, reflexive and rational, usually immortal, having an abode in the sky after the mortal body ceases to live. Many centuries after, it became an object of scientific scrutiny. And first it was banned by behaviorists. That's a black box. It's a mental concept. We cannot observe it, we cannot see it, therefore it's meaningless. We can only talk in terms of stimulus and response, you know the story. So it was banned. Or some more clever people said we can make money out of it, so let's reduce it to our physiology. The peak of which was a reasonably recent theory of Cloninger connecting three types of personality with three dominant neurotransmitters in our body. Too good to be true. Absolutely stupid theory. And most of all, in science, at this moment, it was expressed as an entity consisting of few clusters of common traits that ostensibly express a huge field of individual differences through group similarities, as in a psychometric research. And it is fascinating to see this sort of a macho struggle. Mine is bigger than yours. So Eisen said there are only two, then three factors of personality, and Cattell says, no, mine is bigger, there are 16, and then Costa and McRae today say, no, you know nothing about psychometry research, there are actually 5, and this will go on forever. I'm very sorry to say, but I just cannot miss the opportunity to say that, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, psychometric research to personality was a colossal waste of time. In traditional epistemology, although there were some aberrances, whatever diversity was employed in studies on personality in philosophy and science, certain epistemological positions were prevailing. So the most important thing for the science and for the psychology in 20th century, personality was seen as a real entity, being a biophysical concept, not a figment of our imagination, and it was a reflection of something really existing in nature and not residing in the eye of the beholder. Personality was as it is, and our task was to deduce the truth about it, either by careful philosophical scrutiny or rigorous scientific research. But the time has changed, of course. Even Bob Dylan got his Nobel Prize. So postmodernity has arrived, indeed, and it began to talk about subjectivity. So personality was a little bit sort of pushed back. And subjectivity appears in a number of discourses in the social sciences to describe the human being constituted and already altered by historical, social, and linguistic structures. So the postmodern conception of subjectivity can be distinguished by its opposition to Cartesian notion of subject. The latter can be described as a strongly bounded agent of self-legislation conceived in traditional epistemology as the counterpart to object. But postmodern subject was something completely different. Despite diverse formulation, postmodern authors have a common impulse to deconstruct the humanist subject as the intended source of knowledge and meaning. They see it as a product. Something completely different, as Monty Python would say. Such accounts redefine the human self as an entity constructed by and not simply reflected in different discourses. So we become an unresolved Oedipus because we read psychoanalysis and then look to us through those texts. We become core constructs in Kelly's book, and then looking through the lens of that position. Thus, postmodern subject becomes situated, an entity constituted in social discourse of different cultures, linguistic structures, and signifying practices. I'm sorry, but there is no subject. There is no, how do you call I forgot the name.
Self.
I remember tomorrow.
Email us.
What do you get when you go to the doctor and he looks at and then has something visual?
Prescription.
Substance, something material.
Kako je na srpskom bilo?
Ne mogu da se setim. I cannot remember even in Serbian.
Could you please say it in Serbian? There are a number of
No, we can't.
Substrate, substratum.
Substrate.
Yeah.
Substrate.
There is no substrate to personality. It is made of air and a couple of words. Now this is the one so-called empirical sciences hate, the death of the subject. Of course it's a metaphor. It doesn't mean that a human being is deployed to a living and that we went to a funeral and they went goodbye. Foucault and Derrida have proclaimed the death of the Cartesian subject and author, assigning a special importance to the concept of discourse which becomes the primary medium for construction of subjectivity, power, and knowledge. It's actually about talk. The death of the subject does not mean that the human being is denied or deprived of life. It is signifying a divorce from a highly dubious construction of the subject as luminous, rational, self-contained, being that it is undeniable source of its own rationality and certainty of existence. Actually, early voices of that were found as long ago as in Marx and Freud's writing. So Marx was giving priority to the material world, elaborating the word capitalism, and Freud was decentering the rational self in isolating the unconscious determinism of human thought and action. Marx has questioned the opinion that people have an inner.
Am I allowed to ask something?
Yes.
I mean, just thinking of Marx and Freud both as Jews,
Yes.
Could they have got something from the Jewish tradition that informed that?
Probably, but to be very honest, I
You
want
don't
to forget Marx and Freud as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So I don't want to. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not
No, but it'd be
acquainted with
interesting.
Jewish tradition,
another
but no.
thing.
The only answer I can give you is the honest one. I don't know.
Let's
I,
not go
I
there.
do know
It's a
we
good
can talk
idea
about
to
You won't go
elaborate
there.
further. Thank you for sharing.
Okay.
Anyway, so personality was seen as a product of society, their activity being social activity, their consciousness being social consciousness, and thus their personality being the social personality. Of course, Marx didn't give any further accounts of this. He didn't explain the mechanism, he didn't explain the whole story. He just, put that as a stamp. So we have heard it from our political leadership for 1,000 times, but never actually understood what it means before the social theory has risen. So personality was in his work moved from this very tight space between the ears into something more comfortable space among people. And this thinking influenced not only Soviet psychologists like Vygotsky, Rubinstein, and Leontiev, but also a lot of social theorists like Bakhtin, Foucault, etc., and as well social constructionists like Gergen, Schotter. You say Hare or Harry? Hare. Probably the peak of this Marxist approaches to personality was Erving Goffman's work, who was among the first to suggest personality fragmentation and cohabitation of different selves. So he was actually saying, we all know that there is a huge difference between life and a theater, but the problem arises once we have to define it. So we all are presenting ourselves. We are always in a role. We are never sort of this honest being, coming from its inner essence, being totally spontaneous. You're always presenting yourself, like the actor in the theater. So for him, personality was not seen only in the light of possessing certain attributes, but also as a process of adjustment to different social norms and expectations from the others. Okay, so it was not closely bound and containing itself anymore. Others began to play a big role in that. Freud introduced the idea that man is not the master in his own house. How do you say, I am not a commander of my ship? Is there something like that in English? So he invented this unconscious part of our psyche, which influences the most of our behavior. And society was our response to the need for safety versus freedom. Societies function based on silent consensus on what is acceptable. This consensus causes a necessary split. What is conscious is what is socially acceptable. The superego is a primary structure for which societal norms shape our psychological configuration. And it is interesting, it's one of the few points where Kelly and Freud converge, because they both see guilt and shame as an instrument of social control, not the fear which we had before the New Ages. What we are is created and controlled by various social forces. This slide is here only because Vladimir Miletic, co-author of this presentation, is very much in love with Lacan. I hate this person. So if it was me, I wouldn't put it here. Just because he being so bloody loose that what he claims on one page he disputes on the other. So that's not my cup of tea. Anyway, Lacan said that experience is organized in three orders: real, imaginary, and symbolic. Symbolic order predates the subject and gives it structure based on contingent linguistic and cultural rules. Subjectivity is formed between social rules represented in the symbolic and the personally constructed imaginary ego. Together, these two orders constitute our field of reality. Reality itself can never be known, but it can be known. That's Lacan.
That's Lacan.
Our experience is inevitably divided between these different ways of structuring experience, and while they do overlap in some instances, they exist parallel to each other, rendering our experience inherently split and fragmented. The importance of Lacan and the importance of Vygotsky is something completely opposite to Kelly. They say there is no thinking without language. There is no higher psychological functions before we become a member of symbolic realm. So there must be some societal affairs going on in us before we become personal beings. Ha! Dead. So Kelly has moved personality of the object into the system of anticipations of the subject of knowledge. In a very obscure paper, which I got courtesy of Francesco Wikipedia Velicogna, was a book in which he presented a paper in Copenhagen to the war veterans. Don't ask me why was that. It was 61, in which this was the only paper ever in which he gave his definition of personality. So yes, there is a definition of personality by Kelly, but you have to know Francesco in order to get this. So actually, my personality becomes my theory of your personalities. My personality would be my theory of Lola, my theory of David, my theory about Peter and Sally, and a further universalization of this theory to other people. So a theory, I have different constructs clustering in a theory of personality. Your personality would be my personality. So Kelly actually sets the otherness as a precondition, constitutive element of the existence of each and every self. So I cannot have my personality without you. And you need to become personalities by having me as somebody who is having the theory. Which was actually very brave in that time. It was a total step in the back to Albert. Okay, we are jumping 40 years now. Yes, please.
Just quickly, I mean, obviously, Kelly's central concept, or Eric, one of some, is person.
I don't have time, sorry, but,
okay.
No, but, if you jump into constructing the subject, there is a lovely paper which actually gives the amount of personal that in English tradition personal will see something highly individual, agentic, blah. But personal, I forgot the name of the old, Stringer?
Yeah.
Stringer said personality was actually a social concept in Kelly's idea. So personal means incorporating our uniqueness with otherness. So yes, you choose freely, but always choose from the shelf of the social offering. And now this one is completely interesting, talking about consistency of personality, about traits which are making our behavior consistent through different situations. was killed by God. And he said, post-World War II world is liquid, characterized by the economy of fast-aging objects and excess of waste. Now, if you think about all those cartoon glasses and leftovers of the food and electronic waste, you are wrong, because he was thinking about ecological waste. Postmodern persons are thus hybrids. They must contain a multitude of identities that are continuously replaced and rejected as waste, versus stable, predictable pre-World War II person. Anxiety and responsibility thus become intrinsic qualities of postmodern subjects. And in the postmodern liquid world, freedom is reflected in our responsibility to self-create. However, in a world that keeps accelerating, liquid subjects self-construct based on prefabricated, socially constructed identities. In the process of searching for individuality and self-creation, they become mere intersections of socially constructed identities. Not very much different from what was Kelly talking about, definition of a person. And there is another one I didn't put here. It's J. Lifton's idea of protean self. Like a Greek god, Proteus, who could take any form he wanted, psychologically is actually doing this. We are having to take many different forms through our history. So we are not so consistent, but more fragmented as we actually wanted to think. The center could not hold. Falcon is not here in the corner. Examples of different conceptions of human being, personality, and inseparable notions notwithstanding, are so many and diverse that no one has managed to compile and present them systematically yet. There is no complete book of personality, period. The history of personality has gone through a long road in which humans were portrayed as puppets of gods, masks, luminous sparks, active monads, cogitating subjects, slaves to irrational desires, black boxes, prevailing neurotransmitters, theaters, theories about others, even the liquid waste. Whatever the personality is, its history shows that visions of human being as given whole contained in itself, and being supported by its own rationality, are being abandoned. The center could not hold. The best lack convictions, and the worst are full of passionate intensity. So this is one of two main insights for me. Hang on. What history shows is that the history of personality validates Kelly's idea of constructive alternativism. We always must reconstruct what we cannot deny, the man said. Traveling along road from the mass to discourse, subsequent constructions of personality have shown a massive alternation of different dimensions of meaning through which this term was elaborated. This diversity has also shown that constructive alternativism is not just an apt name for Kelly's philosophical position, but also a forerunner to the idea of subjectivity, in which the human being is seen as a subject being constituted or constructed through many different discourses. And this is what the man has wrote in one of his last articles. He was well aware of the transformation of subject in that, and increasing inconsistency of nature in society has raised the pressure for adequate psychological transformation. So we have to revise the ways we use for problem solving. We are raising the need to ask new questions, frequently testing new modes of behavior, and constantly optimizing functioning, leading to constant transformation of being. I just think, what would Kelly say today with this increasing of the speed of change? So I would say that transformativity is a precursor of distribution of self. Because we have to enter this cyclical triad. We learn, then we change, then we get some experience, but this experience opens new vistas for which we have to learn again, gather new experience, and etc., etc. So continued transformative praxis, which is a term which actually Jack Nazir picked from Kelly, gives the rise of new forms of individuality. And new forms of individuality actually bring about new discourses for constituting human beings. So this is this spiraling thing which never stops. Foucault was talking about distribution of subject. For him, subject was being everywhere, in the cemeteries, in the textbooks, like Alexandria Library, like internet. You know, if you want to talk about somebody, you Google her first, period. But a closer look at many, okay, we have the distribution of meaning, okay, point well taken. But a closer look at many varying dimensions of meaning through which personality was discursively constituted also enables another insight, that the personality has been elaborated through both contrasted poles of all the dimensions in which it was elaborated. It was seen in essence, and it was seen as relation. It was seen consistent, it was also seen as inconsistent. Biosocial, biophysical, unique, common, given, acquired, reduced, constructed, personal, social, etc., 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 but there were always two poles being equally elaborated through history. So it is actually having a huge dispersion. Working with a construct that has such a huge scope of dispersed meaning, like personality, is becoming more and more difficult. I don't want to say obsolete, but more and more difficult. As the effort of knowing what we say when we say personality becomes too demanding. Although Kelly urges us to make an act of daring and enter the unknown to seek for the answer, in order to minimize anxiety and make our anticipations predictably clearer, there is the price to be paid. This price is the rise of new, even greater anxiety in the future. So we coin those terms in order to resolve our anxiety, but it brings forth new anxiety to be resolved. It may sound farcical, but the only way to minimize our recent anxieties is to be even more inventive in the creation and dispersion of meanings. Predictably, this will in turn produce more anxiety to be coped within the future. The well-established version of Kelly's fundamental postulate from his Capital 55 book says that a person's processes are psychologically channelized by the ways in which he anticipates events. Now, the favorite work of Faye in her later life was comparing this to another version, alternative fundamental postulate, which says that it is the nature of life to be channelized by the ways events are anticipated. He's omitting person. He's omitting processes. What are the reasons for omitting words processes and person and restoring to passive voice in the alternative construct, the fundamental? What is this sudden, inconsistent reconstruction by contrast, resorting to an essentialist account of nature of life after a lifelong career of advocating the idea that nature is just an alternative hypothesis about reality? Nothing less and nothing more. What happened to him? Was he slot rattling? Or was it a consistent illustration of constructive alternativism, claiming that we always reconstruct what we can deny, even our fundamental postulates? Or could it be Kelly's anticipation of chaos of knowledge raised by too eager application of constructive alternativism when the term personality became so many things for so many people? becoming predictably unclear and obsolete. So it's just like crying out, "Oh, George, give us a break with this alternative construction." We do not know. I don't know. But I think it will be a lovely piece of work which remains to be researched in the future. Am I within the limits, or did I?
We're there really, but maybe one question.
Yes.
I've got a short question for you.
Yes.
What does this all mean for the very popular current diagnosis of personality disorder?
Very brief.
The
question was brief.
Yeah, well, the problem is they don't have a clue what they are talking about when they say personality.
Exactly.
That's what, but you see, I was so reassured that I'm sorry that Richard is here. He's not here. Because Richard says, you know, when you do a grid, you are making this very strict psychometric research. But on the meta level, you know, if you use discrepancies and if you use correlations, you get two different structures. But there is no meta criterion telling you which one is better or which one you should use. So I think that actually this is the thing.
Yes.
But if you want a fuller account, we have to go to the plane for Dublin. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Finish.
Yes, yes, yes.